Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tomiko Brown-Nagin, Dean of the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard University. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our annual Kim and Judy Davis Dean's Lecture in the Sciences. Before we begin today's program, I want to take a moment to acknowledge Kim and Judy Davis, whose support makes this lecture series possible, along with members of the Radcliffe Institute Leadership Society and all our annual donors. Your generosity keeps Radcliffe programming free and open to the public, and we thank you. Today, we have the opportunity to engage with Anne Wojcicki, who is co-founder and CEO of the path-breaking biotechnology company 23andMe. I'm delighted to have Anne with us today. The potential of genomic science, the science at the heart of 23andMe's success, is immense, and the field is rapidly evolving. Genomic science is helping us understand the causes of disease, and it is opening exciting new avenues in clinical treatment of cancers and many rare conditions. Genomic science is also being used to identify precise drug targets and anticipate drug reactions based on patients' genetic profiles. And this is only the beginning. Far more research lies ahead. Biomedical big data also has transformative potential. Vast repositories of biological specimens and data, known as biobanks, have proliferated to include open access research projects such as the UK Biobank, as well as those managed by private companies like 23andMe. 23andMe has sold over 12 million direct-to-consumer genetic testing kits, and as of last year, some 8 million of those consumers had opted into the company's research efforts. In pursuing this research, the company has also helped universities and pharmaceutical companies recruit study participants, overcome geographic barriers to clinical trials, and utilize 23andMe's genetic data bank. But as we laud the potential of genomic science, we must also consider the full spectrum of scientific, ethical, legal, and social implications of this rapidly progressing field. It's clear that we're still learning about the science itself and about the health conclusions one can responsibly draw from the genetic information. That fact begs the question: do consumers have the resources they need to understand the results of direct-to-consumer genetic reports? And once they have their data, can consumers access healthcare providers who are equipped to interpret that genetic data and who can advise on appropriate health interventions? Beyond individual consumers are the communication strategies used to share genetic data with the public responsible and culturally appropriate? What input should communities have in determining how their data are presented? We must also weigh scientific questions about the benefits and trade-offs of specific clinical applications, practical questions about uniform standards for research and clinical care, and ethical questions about consumer and patient privacy and informed consent. Fortunately, our distinguished guest this afternoon brings extensive knowledge and experience to bear on these complex issues. Anne Wojcicki graduated from Yale University with a BS in biology and spent the first decade of her career on Wall Street working in healthcare investing. In 2006, Anne co-founded 23andMe with the mission to help people access, understand, and benefit from the human genome. Not long after, 23andMe put genetic information directly into consumers' hands. With just a small vial of saliva, the company can trace your genetic ancestry and identify risk for certain diseases evident in your DNA. Since then, the firm's impact has only grown. Anne has been called the most daring CEO in America by Fast Company, and she was recently named one of the 16 most influential and inspirational modern tech leaders by Forbes. After Anne's remarks, she will be joined in conversation by my colleague, Jonathan Zittrain, a noted expert on cyber and privacy law. Jonathan is the George Bemis Professor of International Law at Harvard Law School, a professor at Harvard Kennedy School, and a professor of computer science at Harvard's Paulson School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. He's also director of the Harvard Law School Library, co-founder and director of the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society, and the author of The Future of the Internet and How to Stop It. Thank you, Anne and Jonathan, for joining us. Now for some logistics. Following Anne and Jonathan's discussion, we'll turn to audience questions. You can use the Q&A feature on Zoom to submit your questions at any point during the program. We only ask that you keep your questions brief so we can address as many of them as possible. With that, let's begin. Welcome, Anne. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I am just really thrilled to be here. So with that, I will start going through a brief presentation, and then we'll be able to jump into discussions with Jay-Z and the audience. So the company really started out of this question of who's in charge. And one thing that I realized when I worked on Wall Street is I'd have these conversations with pharma companies and health insurance executives and hospitals, and people would all debate about this patient's data and the subject, and they were always talking about the patient, but I realized the patient was never there. And it's one thing that I realized as I thought about my own experience and as I saw how the healthcare world worked, I realized that we're not actually in charge, that the whole system is set up in such a way that is almost as close to something I can see as communism, that the entire ecosystem is in charge of you. And that what I realized is I want to be in charge. I want to be in charge of my own health. So 23andMe really came out of that passion. And the thing that I always thought about is, well, why did I feel so strongly that I needed to be in charge? And why is it that the world that I saw when I worked in investing, I found to be so offensive? And part of that comes from my mother. My mother, who's, she's written books about the family. My mom is she's a real character. And one thing, my sister and I, we had a good time. We had pulled our medical records one day from Kaiser, and we saw this note in there, and it said, "Note, this mother has had a hard time being rational, as most of us in pediatrics know." And for anybody who knows my mother, this absolutely makes sense. And so we asked, we talked to my mom, why? Why was my mom always fighting with her doctor? She was always questioning and always wanted to be in charge. And part of that comes from the story of my mother. This is my mom when she was little and her little brother, David. And she's about 5 years older than David. And what happened is that David ate a bottle of aspirin and he died. And it wasn't that he died simply. He ate the bottle of aspirin and they took him to all kinds of different doctors, hospitals. And each time they said, "He's fine. Take him home." And my grandmother would get back in the car with my mom and say, it's not right. It's not right. They go somewhere else and would say, "It's not right." And finally, they got a doctor to take him. And my grandmother called in the morning and said, "How is he doing?" And they said, "He's dead. He's in the morgue." And this experience was obviously so traumatic for the family. But what my mom really took away from this is that if you don't take care of yourself, no one will. And I have had this mindset beaten into me since I was little that I have to be the one who's taking care of myself. I need to learn to be independent. I need to learn that to ask questions, that I need to know that no one is going to care as much about my health as I do, and that I really have to be in charge. So a lot of what the company came from was this lifelong experience that my mother had taught me, combined with the Wall Street world, that I want to be in charge of myself. I want to be in charge of my health, and that the system that we all live in does not support you actually being in charge of your own healthcare. So why did I always focus on genetics? And, genetics was something that I started to see in my investment career. And I had always, since a child, always been fascinated by DNA. And the reason why is I find that your DNA is, it's what you're born with. You can't change it. Everyone has a certain kind of, deck of cards, but that there's this incredible world of lifestyle and environment. And if only I knew what I was at risk for, that then I could potentially change my environment. And what I said is like, I absolutely want to change my environment. I just need to know what my genetics are, so I know how to think about how to live in the best way possible. So 23andMe started in 2006 with the idea that we help people access, understand, and benefit from the human genome. And those three words are really critical mission words for the company. The access is something that, again, I saw when I worked in finance, that most people don't have access to care. It's expensive, it's hard to often get. And so it was really clear to me that 23andMe was going to be direct to consumer from the start, and it was going to be affordable. And I saw in other parts of the world, they actually have these direct to consumer models that work, that can make sense, and that there was absolutely a way for us to have a direct to consumer opportunity to allow genetics out there. Understand was really a reaction to what I saw in the medical world, which was sort of the white coat supremacy that that only we can understand how to take care of you, and that people cannot actually understand their own genetic information. And that it was, again, sort of this, the hierarchy that you need to have a medical degree and you need a PhD to really be able to understand it. And what I found through my experience of volunteering in hospitals and working at NIH is that if people are given the right tools, they can absolutely step up and understand. And in some ways, this also relates to how my mom thinks about how she raises her students and how she raised us as kids. If you believe in people, they will rise up. They will absolutely have the opportunity of understanding this information. So that is a key component of this company. And the benefit is really about our research model, that if we all come together, that we're actually all aligned, our incentives. With everyone on this call, I'm aligned with you that we all want to be healthy and we want to prevent disease and we want to have the best for our family, that all of us will benefit from the human genome if we come together. So the research component was really all intertwined with this idea that we will benefit from the human genome, and 23andMe is going to lead up how can we crowdsource research so that we, the community, all benefit. Also central to 23andMe, the principles of how we operate, I was very intentional that it's going to be different than the way the rest of the healthcare system operates, and that it's going to be based on choice, and it's going to be based on transparency. And when I think about choice, I often find when I go to the doctor's office, when I go in, when I had my children, for instance, and I have to sign the consent form, I'm not given a lot of choice. I often mark up the consent form, but I'm not given a lot of choice. And then I'm not necessarily given the opportunity to pull my data if I want to. Also, things like research. I might want to participate in research, but it's hard to participate in research. And what if I change my mind? So 23andMe was all built around this idea that we give people those controls to potentially opt in, to potentially, if you want to change your name, you can always opt out. We also allowed people to download their data, which again was referenced in the intro, is controversial. Should people have access to all their raw data? Should they have access to their entire genome? We also created tools for how do you actually see some of this sensitive information, areas like Alzheimer's, breast cancer risk. So we created an additional level of opt-in so that you have the choice to say, I want to learn about my ancestry. I want to learn about, some of the wellness features, but I don't want to learn about Alzheimer's. So we give people that choice about the amount of information they want to understand. DNA relatives as well. We give people that choice. Do you want to actually opt into DNA relatives or not? And last, we always allow people to delete their account if they want to. Transparency is also, for me, it was such a key component of what had to be part of 23andMe, because I feel like what's pervasive in the healthcare system is a lack of transparency about what actually is happening with your data and what are the incentives. So for me, it was really important that our consents are actually readable and that our customers understand them. And we can see this. Oftentimes our customers will get to the consent and they pause. And sometimes they wait and then they come back. But we want our customers actually to really understand what they're opting into. And we should make it clear, it's always an opt-in. People have to actually click, do you want to consent for research? Do you want to click, consent for, you want to opt into individual level share? Do you want to have your samples biobanked? So it's a long process that we made it intentional. We want our customers to know exactly the types of things that we were taking on. We remind people when they are taking surveys that they're opted into research. So again, for us, that was something that was important, is keep reminding people about the decisions that they have made. We have things like a transparency report. We are one of the leaders that put that out there in genetic testing companies. We have a privacy center to help our customers understand everything that we are doing so that they know, that they feel comfortable and that they're aware. The 23andMe blog is really an important way also for us to communicate with our customers. When we have research findings, when we're doing something that's new, very different than a lot of other types of research, this is super interactive. We see our customers as partners, our research participants as partners, not necessarily as human subjects where we have a wall between the information, but we're continuously wanting to update our customers about what is happening. Also, we make sure our customers have access to the research when it does come out. It has been really important for me that this is actually in open access journals so that customers can always read about it. So just as history, the healthcare world does not always have this sense of choice and transparency. And this is one of the papers that I always found fascinating. In 1961, JAMA did a study surveying physicians, would you tell your patients if they had cancer? And what they found was amazing, that over 90% of physicians were saying they would not want to tell their patients that they had cancer. So there's been this mindset. And again, part of also, again, if you think back on the key principles of, our mission of helping people that they can understand, we've always believed that transparency and making sure our customers have the right to know this information is really important, and that the customers can in fact understand it. What's interesting for us is 23andMe started in 2006, but it's now 2020. We still have a fair amount of resistance about whether or not consumers should be empowered with direct access. And there's a couple of major groups, someone like ACOG, the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, actually, for instance, has strong statements saying that this should be discouraged. And in fact, when we've tried to engage in dialogue with the organization, we're not even allowed to attend, to participate in the dialogue, because it's so clear that they want to discourage direct-to-consumer testing, and they want this to be flowing through a medical professional. So again, part of what I look at that is so key that 23andMe does is the belief that not all health actions, not all procedures need to be mediated by a doctor or a health professional. And that in fact, that's part of what we've gotten now with the FDA is the data to show that sometimes a consumer they can access it themselves and they can understand it themselves. But what we find is this incredible resistance that is still there. So one thing that I also have found, the lack of transparency and choice that is also pervasive in the insurance world. And this is an example in breast cancer testing. And one thing I find is that breast cancer testing by insurance companies is very prescriptive and restrictive of who actually is going to qualify for breast cancer testing. And a lot of people go missed because of the insurance criteria. And the question I always have for customers is, do they realize that oftentimes the healthcare that they're getting is dictated based on insurance guidelines and not necessarily about what is in their best interest? And so one thing, we actually did a paper looking at our customers who found that they had one of the Ashkenazi Jewish BRCA mutations. So we test for 3 of those. And what we found is that a number of our customers never would have qualified for insurance reimbursement. And so if they had not found their BRCA mutations through 23andMe, they would have been missed in the system. So they never would have qualified. And that's the question I have when I challenge the healthcare system, is that when customers want to get this information, how is it that we can actually start to circumvent some of those guidelines to actually do more about what's in the best interest for individuals, and recognizing that the insurance guidelines have real limitations? So one thing I wanted to pull up here, which I also just find fascinating, and this is by a professor at Harvard, who I do not know, who created this health data map, and shows the transparency of what actually happens with your data. And again, this is something that would be great actually to talk with Jonathan about too, is the Facebook world and Google. There's been a real push of transparency. And where is your Facebook information going? Who has it? But what I find is some of the biggest offenders in healthcare where your information, it becomes de-identified, but then it circulates everywhere. And I wonder, do patients actually know where all their information is going? And so what's also been very clear for 23andMe is that we wanted our customers to own their privacy and the choice of how this information is being used. So again, one of the things that was controversial about 23andMe in the early days is we allow customers to share their data. I have the ability to share my reports with my parents, with my siblings, and we make it really easy. We make it easy to get a download, but it's really hard for all of you to actually pull your medical record. If you try pulling your medical record, it's really hard to get the full record. Yet your information is circulating entirely around, again, in this closed world that you do not have access to. So even areas, there's companies called SureScripts that has all of the prescription data in this country, yet not a single customer can get access to that data. So 23andMe, like I said, came out of the desire to do things in a really different way that was entirely going to be consumer centric. So we have two products. We have an ancestry product. We have a health and ancestry product. One is $99. The other is almost $200. And we're by far the most comprehensive direct-to-consumer health and ancestry product out there. We create an experience. This is, again, a different type of approach where I said, I want healthcare to be fun. I want it to be, it's why our chromosomes look like, they look like Mike and Ike candies. Like, we wanted it to be fun. We wanted people to learn about their health side. We want them to learn about their ancestry. We want them to get insights so they feel engaged with themselves. So I'm really proud. We now have an incredibly diverse set of health reports, wellness reports, and the ancestry side. And we're not going to talk about ancestry, but holy cow, we've opened up this whole world of identity and understanding what is that definition of who you are and how you connect to the world. And what does that mean to have Jewish ancestry? What does it mean to have African ancestry? So it's opened up a whole new world that is frankly just incredibly exciting. So the ancestry service, like I said, I talked about what we do in terms of the ancestry composition. We also have something, the family tree. And what we find is people absolutely love finding individuals that they are connected with. So this has been really the way that customers start to get comfortable and have started to learn about genetic information. The health service that we have is really all about learning about risks, where we believe our customers have the ability to do something, either for themselves with this information or to share it with their physicians. We had a warning letter in 2013. I am incredibly proud of the company and my team for getting the data that proves that consumers actually can access and understand this information without a physician or without a medical professional. We now have reports, again, that I am incredibly proud of my team for proving this with data, that breast cancer, the BRCA study that I talked about, as well as now pharmacogenetics, the understanding of how your genome interacts with medications, that all of this can be direct to consumer. So we now have 6 FDA authorizations. Like you mentioned on the talk, we have over 12 million customers. I'm really proud. We are by far the largest health platform that is out there with recontactable customers. And what is exciting for me, people ask, where are you going with this company? Like, what do you want to do? My dream is that I can get my customers to be healthier, that we really do create this inflection point where people want to be in charge. Going back to that first question of who's in charge of your health, this information inspires people and it gives them a path. It's no longer about, just generic information about, eat better, exercise, don't smoke. But now it's in the context of you have a higher risk of type 2 diabetes and you see it in your family and this is in your DNA and there's things you can do. Wow, that's such an inspiring, empowering message for people. And what we find is that our customers want to take that information and do more with it. So I just want to end with that question about who's actually in charge of your health. And while there's so much happening in the world with digital health and with the rise of the customer, I want to encourage everyone to think about, are you actually the person that is in charge of those decisions and your data and all this information? And do you know what's going on in the background? And to encourage you all to ask more questions so that you really can be in charge. And with that, I can't wait to engage with Jonathan.
Anne, thank you so much. That is an origin story for 23andMe, totally worthy of Stan Lee. It's got everything. And so let's just jump right in. Lab coat supremacy. And you mentioned oh, yes?
Yeah, no, go on.
Yes, you mentioned the FDA authorizations that have been coming. If you were on the other side of things, say at the FDA, what would you have them do now? Would it just be if there's a company that wants to recognize and document an association between a particular genotype and a particular phenotype and expression of it, should they have to go to the FDA at all to be licensed to, I guess, produce a report that says, congratulations, you have AG and that means such and such?
Well, it's a very interesting question and very timely. We have, what we have found since our FDA warning letter is that almost no other companies have gone through the FDA. And in fact, what they've done is they've kind of taken advantage of this loophole where they have, they put together what we call a doc in the box, where there's a doctor that's sort of behind the scenes that you never interact with, that you never see, who's writing the prescription for this service. So you have the ability to get access to this information. And it's actually opened the door for a lot of shadier types of reports. And so I would say, like, is there a true association with vitamins and your genetics? Or, people always want to know, oh, I should eat this kind of meal. So part of what we try to do with our customers is teach them that just because something has been published once doesn't mean that it's true. And I should give one example. There's a mutation called MTHFR, which our customers always ask about because it's associated with a vitamin, a folate vitamin. And they would love to see us put out a report, but we can't get the data. Like, there's no data to support any of the claims. So we have not put it out, but yet there's demand for it. So I think it's really important. Actually, the FDA path requires that your data is really meets an analytical criteria, and that there is a scientific bar that you can't just say, like, oh, I found this association in 12 people in Iceland, and therefore I'm going to put it out to the masses.
So this sounds like you're supportive of the FDA playing a role. They kind of do it once, and then once it's done for a given association, they're out of the way, and you don't need the doc in the box?
No, I think that you need what we have done. Like, every time we have a new set of reports, for instance, like our pharmacogenetic reports, we had to go back to the FDA and prove out the analytical validity, like proving out that we can accurately test what we're testing. But we also had to prove out user comprehension. That to me is a really important point that no other companies have, that you need to prove out that people actually are understanding it.
But if we're going to
making the right choices,
and it sounds like you were like, come on in, everybody, come join us in having to run everything by the FDA. Like, that's the world you'd want.
I actually think that the FDA has brought real value.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's I don't always agree with everything, and there's times where I can feel like it's not moving as quickly as I'd love to see it. But frankly, right now, I would actually love to see the FDA be more aggressive, because I worry about some of the quality of reports that are out there outside of us. So I think that in the direct-to-consumer world, it's really important that there is actually real quality that people can trust. And I think we live in a time where people don't know what is fake news and what's real. And in terms of science, I mean, holy cow, we're seeing this right now with COVID. People don't know what to trust. So for me, our brand, like what's key is that I have respect by my customers and I have respect by the scientific community. And part of that comes from the fact that we've proven this with the FDA. And again, both sides now trust us.
Now, you started the company in an era in which gene patents were floating around and thought to be potentially legally valid. That door has been mostly closed by the Supreme Court in the interim, but potentially kicked open again by legislation that would restore the idea of gene patents to the patent statute. And I'm curious if you have a thought on whether it's okay to patent a gene.
In some ways it's been, we were such strong proponents of not patenting genes. And so we were quite enthused when we saw that happen. And frankly, you can see the harm of areas like the breast cancer test, when there was, you couldn't get access to it unless you went through the company that owned that patent. So I think that we're supporters, obviously. We have a therapeutics business. So we're supporters of method, using like patenting the actual molecule, and so that you can develop a drug. But the genes, it just seems totally counterintuitive for a company, especially like 23andMe, to even think of patenting a gene.
Well, at the moment you can say, and the Supreme Court agrees with you.
That's good to know.
Now, I suppose the Affordable Care Act gets struck down, and there's not an immediate, amazing replacement ready to roll in 2 weeks. And we're in a world, whether in the United States or maybe in other jurisdictions, where pre-existing conditions could mean that you wouldn't get insurance or you'd pay a lot more for it. What would you say to somebody nervous about discovering something that they could act upon, maybe to try to mitigate or head out through 23andMe, but that also, I guess, would mean they're filling out that insurance form and it says, tell me what pre-existing conditions you have. Would that be a concern for a little knowledge being a dangerous thing for the consumer?
Well, then I would put it back to you. So there's the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, known as GINA, which explicitly prevents health insurance companies and employers from using genetic information to discriminate. So what I would then argue, knowing your genetic information can be a risk factor, but it's not a pre-existing condition. And that GINA is going to protect people from any kind of discrimination for their health insurance. Would you concur?
I'm not here to offer legal judgments, but I would certainly,
you are the professor, Jay-Z.
As an academic, I would absolutely think that it would be terrible to put people in a box where they might want to know something, but once they know it, it somehow taints them for what benefits they could expect to get in the insurance market. It's just at some point, the insurance market is predicated on ignorance in order to spread risk, because none of us knows if we'll get sick. And at the point that you really do know it, it's just social insurance rather than risk insurance.
I would say it's part of where the system is really challenged, because in your ideal world, I want the people who are paying for my healthcare to know that I potentially have a risk factor for, macular degeneration and going blind, and a risk factor for diabetes or atrial fibrillation, because I want my provider to be thinking about what is the right kind of preventative care, as well as what is the right kind of screening. And I would say that's one of the key issues in healthcare, is that preventative care, like most decisions, are really based on whether or not there's a 3-year ROI. which means I'm only going to pay for you to get access to this kind of preventative means if I'm going to see some kind of benefit in the next 3 years. But that's actually awful, because there's a lot of these, something like diabetes, it's chronic. So I want to almost test people when they're young so that they can have a lifetime of having a kind of behavior rather than changing your behavior at the last minute. So that's where I think that there's a real issue, in that so much of healthcare is based on your sort of 3-year ROI. And in my dream, you actually would have a healthcare insurance company that was using your genetic information to give you the best possible care.
And I guess it's thought of specialized medicine of that sort as kind of the next big frontier for medicine and for good care.
Yeah, and it's open. Just sorry to cut you off, but we know each other too well. What's exciting with the world of digital care is that you can actually now have some of these specialized services. You could actually have a much easier kind of digital consult about how to use this. And the world is blown open of, what are the behavior therapies I want to use on my phone?
I was struck by your mention of Facebook and others who the data just spreads everywhere. And you mentioned LaTanya Sweeney's study of healthcare data going everywhere. There's also the narrower model, some might call it threat model, of law enforcement or intelligence access to third-party records. How do you think through, now having had kind of years to think it through and experience with it, what happens when that magic subpoena arrives at the doorstep and says, we'd like to have you tell us if anything matching the following DNA sequence is in your database, and if so, tell us all about who that is. Or even peer-to-peer, people using 23andMe to find sperm donors or misattributed paternity or something like that. How do you think all that stuff through?
We've been very clear about law enforcement from day one. And in the early days, it was actually very helpful. We had one of our science advisors who thought, he kind of came up as an idea. He's like, really, we could have this exciting business of, America's Most Wanted. Could be amazing. And we kind of sat back. We're like, that's a different company. That's not us. And I think everything that we've set up as we've done our privacy practice and our consents has been about, this is for an individual to use, and the privacy is yours. And we are not going to share information with law enforcement. So we have a transparency report. I would encourage people to look at it. We have never given information to law enforcement. And fundamentally, it's so key for the success of our business that it's hard to imagine we would not fight pretty tooth and nail if there was a subpoena that came our way. But we have never had anything that has even come close.
Gosh, so far it's been don't ask, don't tell.
Say again?
So far it's been don't ask, don't tell.
Well, there's other companies also where, there's another company that's out there that's been very clear that they actually want to kind of take on the crime path. So in some ways, if people want to explore that option, it's not us, and it has nothing to do with the health, and it's not the world. And 23andMe has been very clear that our definition of privacy, and actually, frankly, it was a lot of colleagues of yours who helped us define privacy in those early days, where it was, it was Brad Templeton who at EFF who had sat me down, who had said, the definition of privacy does not mean I don't want to have my data go anywhere. It's that I want to have choice. And I want transparency, like the two key themes of 23andMe. And so for us, it has always been that we're going to give you that choice. We'll allow you to share it when you want, but we're not going to give your information out otherwise. Mm-hmm. The question you have about sperm donors and family members is totally different. And the reality there is that you absolutely can find people that you did not expect to. So one of the consents that is really important that we have is people who have to opt in to DNA relatives. So it's not something that our consent form is long, and there's many different areas for people to opt into, and we remind people about it. But DNA relatives is explicitly something else that you have to opt into to say, do you want to find additional relatives? And people do, and oftentimes, our family, the Wojcickis, were one, never expected that I was going to find family members. And lo and behold, one day my mom called and she's like, I think I found, I think my brother had a baby. And so it turns out I have a first cousin that we found on 23andMe. And it is, I have to just tell people, it is remarkably common. And I think it's overwhelmingly, you obviously have stories of people where there's stress, but overwhelmingly people have connected to new family and forged a sense of identity and belonging that they did not have before.
So at this point, and as you might guess, I'm drawing from some of the many questions piling up in the Q&A thing to put these. I appreciate those who are putting in questions. At this point, you've got like a really big database of people's DNA and SNPs of same, and of their answers to survey questions that prior to 23andMe and its sibling companies, I imagine, to just run a study trying to figure out if there's a correlation between a particular genetic sequence and a particular outcome would be a really big deal. And now, I mean, as a 23andMe subscriber, I'll sometimes get an email that's like, does lemon juice dribble out of the left side of your mouth sometimes? And I'm like, as a matter of fact, it does. It's like, thanks, you're helping science. And then you can find the gene for that, quote unquote. Yeah. And I'm just wondering what you see both as the future of that, if we fast forward 10 or 20 years, and the extent to which that accumulated data is sort of a public good. Or is that sort of among the crown jewels of 23andMe? You went to the trouble of getting everybody to spit. That's 23andMe's data.
Mm-hmm. We both, very good questions. What was interesting for me, again, when I worked in finance and watching companies set up a research study and then take it down, and then set it up and take it down. And again, I grew up on Stanford campus, so I'm close friends with many academics, and the process of recruiting people for your study, and then you write the grant, and a grant alone is going to take you years to get. And then it's agonizing. It's so painfully slow. So in a world where, we're used to typing in something online and getting an immediate search result. And, think like most people on this call probably can't even remember, like in the old days, if you wanted to find a hotel in Egypt, you had to go to the travel agent and look in a book and find it, call. It was awful. And that's kind of what healthcare is like now. Like, I mean, it's so interesting. When I would bike to work in the morning and I would see I would bike past Google, and on the way, on the light post, there would be little signs with like, rip off my, do you want to participate in a clinical trial? Rip off here. So it's clearly not an efficient system. And so the idea with 23andMe was really, I could get millions and millions of people who are consented, who have their genetic information, who just take lots of studies. And then we can ask questions on an ongoing basis, but there's no startup cost and no breakdown cost. And so an example of how we were able to do this incredibly well was with COVID-19, where I have 12 million customers, 80% of them are consented for research. On April 6th, I put out a survey about COVID-19, and I got over 1 million people to take the survey, and over 25,000 people who said that they had COVID, thousands more that were hospitalized. Very quickly, then we could analyze the data and we could put it in a preprint. So very quickly, I contributed to the body of knowledge in the world about how we can potentially have an impact here. So I think that's an example of how we can do it that really impacted everyone. But in some ways, I can do that in all kinds of different areas, whether it's migraines, if it's Crohn's disease, Alzheimer's, like all kinds of areas. I just need to find the time to engage people. So we absolutely do feel like one of the key elements of 23andMe is the research side, is like our ability to make incredibly meaningful discoveries. So it's absolutely not 23andMe that, obviously it's a 23andMe community, but we partner all the time with academics to make research discoveries. And in the early days, the onus was on us to publish and prove out that the platform worked. And now it's proven that the platform works. So mostly what we do is we choose partners and we constantly publish, but we let other academics publish. So we have over 150 papers now. We're constantly fielding requests of people who want to get access to the information, again, in a way that it's aggregated, it's respecting people's privacy.
Mm-hmm. Here's a great question. Is there anything that you could imagine someone learning through this kind of process of research with the database that would prove out, that would be an accurate association of some particular genotype with some particular phenotype, that you would think it's a question that ought not to be asked? Is there anything we shouldn't learn that might be learnable collectively?
Yeah, I think, in general, you would have to first ask the questions that are controversial. Michael Spector wrote a great article in the New Yorker years and years ago about Beijing Genome Institute. And they were doing lots of studies on intelligence. And that for us is very clear. Like, it's not an area where we're asking questions. We're not doing research there. So we do have a very active, ethical, legal, social. It's actually like, this to me is an area, it's a difference between the tech world. Like, there is an ethical, legal, social world that we're super engaged with. And Joanna Mountain, who is one of our first employees, she leads up. We have IRB approval for our studies, institutional review board. So it's something that I think a lot about. Like, we're really actively engaged in what is that ethics. And again, I would push just a little, especially because of you with your background. I did a podcast for one of the big tech companies at one point, and I mentioned the ethical, legal, social. And they actually edited the part of the podcast because they're like, oh no, Ms. Wojcicki was wrong. There's no such thing as the ethical, legal, social world. It's called, I forgot, they put some other word. And I was like, no, let me tell you, I have spent a lot of time with ethical, legal, social. Like, here's the NIH link, here's the world. But it's really important, like, how this data is going to be used and what is that benefit. And this is an example where it's really important to solicit input from our customers, from the academic world, from peers, and understand, like, how are we going to move this forward in the best way? And absolutely feel strongly like other companies need to have an ethical, legal, social review of their own.
Mm-hmm. Going back to those origins, anything you do differently? Had a do-over.
That is so, I was just having lunch with my kids before this, and I was telling them all kinds of stories about the company. They were asking almost the same question. I think that, I think in some ways, I almost would have just run faster when you're a startup. And in those early days, you can get just so much done before, we're now, like, we have a brand and we're known. And there's something that's amazing when you're not known, like going going low profile has real benefits. And I think about, like, there's one very tangible thing, for instance, 23andMe can detect white blood cells from our customers in their saliva. And we could actually detect a mutation called JAK2. And JAK2 is associated with myeloproliferative neoplasm, which is a form of cancer. And we were just about to put out that report when we got our FDA warning letter. And I had held back because I didn't like the design enough. That's my only real regret. I wish I'd put that report out.
And it's out now.
No.
Oh, interesting.
No, and I think
you could have gotten it out before the boom lowered, and then it would have been a done deal. And now you've got to do all of the review.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and it's and I think about, because again, I know a number of people where it would be really meaningful to actually get that kind of information. So I think it's, like I said, there's a beauty in being a startup that you can be
Move
incredibly
fast and
nimble.
break things.
Yeah. And like I said, we always broke things with the context of the ethical, legal, social review with us. And even I'm asked every year by the Stanford community, did 23andMe get their warning letter because of Silicon Valley arrogance, or was it just incompetence? And the first year, everyone rose their hand and they're like, yeah, no, it was Silicon Valley arrogance. And I was like, no, people, like it was really incompetence. Like we were speaking the wrong language. Like it was definitely not a lack of effort, of trying. So for us, we've always wanted to move fast, but with the perspective that like, this is customers' information. Like it's real, like real stories.
Oddly enough, in that case, the JAK2 report is a customized report. That's the product that would require the review. If there's just a paper out there that makes the association and it says at what part of the genome, what particular sequence is indicative of the change of the mutation, I guess there's nothing to stop me from going into my 23andMe data and just asking it what's at that location.
Well, it's a little bit more complicated because it's not part of, again, this is a mutation that you develop over time.
Ah, okay.
So it's a whole different world. So what was one of the things that was interesting that we started to see is that you can actually start to detect chromosomal abnormalities, and these abnormalities are almost linear with age. Like as you get older, you get more of these chromosomal abnormalities, and so being able to identify them and then validate them to an FDA standard. So, the reality for me with 23andMe, there's a lot more that can happen. And, COVID-19 is an example where it's obvious it's a tragedy, but it is absolutely forced forward a lot of the policy decisions that we needed to have a different kind of world. And there's a real opportunity for the 23andMe platform to offer a lot more. And, part of it is, in the digital health space, but absolutely part of it is, additional technologies. Like, would you ever start to do any of these other types of, DNA analyses?
Well, that actually tees up the last question from our quite substantial crowd. There's at least one paper out in which the 23andMe COVID-19 team participated.
Yes.
And knowing only enough to be dangerous, I read the abstract. And I'm just trying to parse this sentence. While non-European ancestry was found to be a significant risk factor for hospitalization after adjusting for sociodemographics and pre-existing health conditions, we did not find evidence that these two primary genetic associations explain differences between populations in terms of risk for severe outcomes. I feel like the second clause took away all those interesting things the first clause was.
No. If I understand it right, and again, this is where I'm sort of in your boat. Like I could pull up my scientists. We found these associations, but essentially that we still see that there are differences in hospitalization with I believe it's the African American population and the Latin American population, and so. Even if we adjust for all other factors and looking at those two, there's still something else that's there. And I think for me, part of it is that line specifically indicates that we should keep looking because these two, the mutations that we found in the O blood type does not necessarily account for the reasons in these different populations why they're still disproportionately affected. So we should keep looking, which is why we've been actively reaching out to other academic groups about finding more hospitalized patients.
Well, as you say, the work has really only just begun with humans and beyond. I'm waiting for 39 and canine so that our dogs can test it.
Soon. There's actually, like I said, we actually had our 39. You remember this from the early days. We had our 39 and canine product for dogs, but there's actually a great company that we have always talked about working with called Embark that we're not working with now, but I have a lot of respect for their science. So they do your dogs. So you could absolutely get your little canines.
Great title too.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. A pleasure chatting. Truly just scratching the surface, but finding so much even there. And Tomiko, back to you for your concluding remarks, and thanks as well. What a pleasure.
So much fun.
Thank you so much, Anne, and thank you again, Jonathan. And of course, thanks to everyone watching for being here this afternoon and for your questions. Our next science program, The Future of COVID-19 Epidemiology, is coming up on Tuesday, December 8th, and I hope you will join us. You can find more information about that and other upcoming programs at radcliffe.harvard.edu. Have a nice evening.